Hi guys. This morning Christians around the world are celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. Strange thing about that is there's so many things out of the New Testament that we just don't think about. We don't think about what it was like when people living at that time had woken up Sunday morning believing that everything they thought, everything they trusted had turned into nothing. Imagine what they were going through after seeing Jesus crucified on the cross. They believed he was the Son of God. They had hope. And they saw his miracles, they heard his words. And yet every morning since that day, they had to suffer thinking that it was all for nothing. All their hopes, all their dreams turned into nothing. Little did they know, in a few hours word would start spreading all around that he had risen. That everything he said, everything he claimed was true. Imagine what that rejoicing must have been like. But we don't really think about what it was like between the day he died on the cross and was taken down and the day he reappeared. There's a lot of things we don't think about. There's a story that we also don't think too much about. It was a Roman centurion. And when Jesus was in Capernaum, the Roman centurion went to Jesus and he asked Jesus to help him because his servant was very ill. We don't think about the fact what it took that Roman centurion to be able to do that. At the time, the Jewish people were treated like pretty much cattle, possessions. They were conquered people. They were worth really nothing. The Romans were worshiping false idols. Those were their gods, and Caesar was their god. This Roman centurion went with his men, humbled himself, and asked Jesus to heal his servant. What did Jesus turn around and do? Did he condemn him? Did he turn him away? Did he tell him, well, you have to do X, Y, and Z before I do anything with you? Why should I help you? Did he say any of that? No, he told the centurion that he would go to his house and he would heal his servant. And the centurion said, no, I'm not worthy of you coming to my house. Imagine what that took, saying that in front of his men. I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. And then he went on to tell Jesus, I am a leader of men. I tell them where to go, they go. I tell them where to stay, they stay. I tell them to do that, I know they do it. He said, you say it will be so, and it will be so. And not long after that, some of the centurion's men came to tell him his servant was healed. Stop and think about that. Stop and think about the faith the centurion had in his men to be able to do that. The faith that he had in Jesus, knowing he would do that. But the love that he had for his servant and the compassion that Jesus showed him. Stop and think about that. Now, there's a lot of veterans that, for one reason or another, they don't think that they can be forgiven. That they've done something they can't be forgiven for. You just heard the story about the centurion. Do you really think there's anything that you can't be forgiven for? On PTSD Patrol, we are talking a lot about mind, body, and spirit connection. We covered a lot about the mind. We covered a lot about the body. Today is a great day to talk about the spiritual. To talk about forgiveness, to talk about redemption. to know that there is nothing you can't be forgiven for. You are the harshest judge of you. The expression, you're your own worst enemy. What you do to yourself, what you put yourself through, is actually a lot worse than anybody else could do to you. I don't like talking about the veterans that I help, but there's a really, really strong story that really needs to be told. I'm not going to get into anything personal on this young veteran, but he basically destroyed himself after something happened in Iraq. He was in the turret last of a convoy, and the Iraqi people were told, do not approach any convoys. It was late one night, and they were on patrol. He saw a car coming, and the car kept coming. He had no choice. He had to open fire because there were a lot of suicide car bombers. And when they went to go assess the situation afterwards, they discovered it was a dad, a mom, and 3 children in the back seat. It destroyed him. By the time his mom had called me, he had already tried to commit suicide twice. She was fearing it would be the 3rd time. And I ended up talking to her, explaining what it was, to try and get her to make life a little bit easier for him. And he did finally call. It took 5 phone calls for him to stop blaming himself, to stop and look at all the other things that he had forgotten about, all the other things that he was tormented by. He was tormented because of the missing pieces that he had forgotten about. He would not allow himself to remember what he tried to do to prevent any of it. He ended up coming to terms with it, and he ended up being able to forgive himself. He forgave people that hurt him when he was basically out of control. And he asked his family to forgive him. I hadn't heard from him for a while, and it was about a year or so later, I got a phone call from his mom. And she said, I want you to know, tomorrow my son's giving his testimony at church, and he's going to be getting married again. He stopped tormenting himself. He forgave himself. He knew that he was forgiven. But the best thing of all was he forgave the dad. Because the dad is the one that made the choice to do what he did that dark night in Iraq, following that convoy and approaching when he should not have. There's no way for that veteran to know why he did what he did. But because he made those choices, everything that happened afterwards was all tied to that choice. The veteran didn't have a choice. He had no way of knowing. And he finally stopped torturing himself and made peace with himself. How many times has that happened to you where you're forced to make a choice? You're forced to decide something. Rather than making peace with it, rather than forgiving yourself, you torment yourself. Don't torment yourself anymore. Remember the basic reason why you did what you did, why you wanted to serve in the first place, and I really doubt that there was any evil in that. Why were you willing to die? You're willing to die for the people you were with. That's what the bottom line is. How's any of that evil? Don't let that love be betrayed. Hang on to who you are. Don't let that pain determine where you go from here. Make peace with that. And understand, there is nothing you can't be forgiven for except what you don't ask to be forgiven for. Be like the centurion. He didn't care what his men thought. He basically trusted them. He knew them well enough to know that whatever he had to do, he was doing it because he loved his servant. And guess what? They probably admired him more for doing it. There's so many things that we are trying to trivialize. You can't limit God's capacity to forgive. You can't limit God's capacity to love. He created that soul that is in you. And everything you are supposed to do on this earth, you are equipped to do. Everything. Including healing. Reach out with some faith. Just a fraction of the faith that centurion had that day. When Jesus was so overwhelmed by the faith that he had and the love that he had for his servant, he didn't even have to make the road trip to his house. He just did it right then and there. So today, remember the day of redemption, when everything was dark for the people who knew Jesus, the people who saw him nailed to the cross, the people who had remembered hearing him speak about love, compassion, mercy, forgiveness. And they ended up rejoicing because everything they believed came true. See you next time.